Welcome to Mentoring Moments. Mentoring Moments is a sub-series of the E-commerce Edge podcast. It is composed of clips taken from Jason's one-to-one and group mentorship sessions. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the E-commerce Edge podcast with me, Jason Greenwood, your host. And I have it on good authority that my next guest to introduce you to is an unmitigated e-commerce badass. And I have this from a friend of mine in the e-commerce space. And I would love to welcome Kara Babb to the pod. Welcome, Kara.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. This is awesome. It's great to be here.
I'm loving it. I mean, you're in the great state of Washington in Seattle, and you said it's pretty wet and cold right now.
Surprisingly not wet. It's been super dry. We've had a lot of snow.
Okay.
So I'm just trying to stay warm at this point. We're not prepared for this.
Yeah, exactly. I feel you. As someone who's now living in Puebla City, I don't have to deal with snow, thankfully, and I'm totally okay with that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But I prefer snow to rain, to be honest, because I find that snow, first of all, I like skiing. So that's the first thing. I enjoy snow for that aspect of alone, tobogganing and everything else. But I find that the cold from snow doesn't seem to soak into you and wrap you up. Cold and wet do.
Yeah, that's one reason I have not been skiing in Washington, even though I've lived here over 10 years, because I grew up in New Mexico. So I am a sunny weather skier. My dad and I would ski in jeans. Not happening here at all. So my husband's from Finland too. So, we love the snow, but it needs to have the sun paired with it. Otherwise, it's not so fun.
I feel you. Look, we won't talk about weather for the whole podcast, but look, you've been in this whole e-commerce game for a very long time. But tell us in your own words, how did you get into this space? Because you've had a deep specialization, especially in marketplaces, Amazon, etc., but also more broadly in e-commerce marketing, branding, etc. So how did you get into e-com to begin with?
It's a random story. I did my undergraduate studies in global business in Mandarin, just a little small school in Southern California, University of Redlands. And then I graduated in 2009, dating myself, but there was no jobs. There was nothing. So I got into a master's degree program in Mandarin. And so I made it my focus. Everything was in Mandarin, research, defense, everything. And the focus was on China's domestic private brands and their evolution since the reform and opening up in the 80s. So did Chinese, lived there for quite a while, and got to the point where it was like, okay, do I want to keep doing this? What do I want to do next? And I randomly had a connection through my university with Amazon. And I remember my interview with them, I had just been preparing because I didn't know e-commerce. I didn't know really retail. Right. And I just studied up so much. And I remember at the end of the interview, I was saying, I wrote a 50-page master's thesis in Mandarin. What do you want me to learn? Just bring it on. And I think that's part of the reason I got the job. So yeah, started at Amazon on the retail side, managing big brands, learning. I say it was a nice time to go in because there wasn't a lot of the tools and kind of shiny objects there are now. They have a lot more kind of support for people working there. But I was teaching myself SQL, right? Building data warehouse reports, manually coding the website. I got to really get my hands into the basic core infrastructure of what is Amazon. Everything from the first early days of their forecasting tools to what their merchandising placements were looking like to the bullseye targeting segments, understanding how they address and find target customers. And so I feel like that gave me such a great foundation to go out. And when I left Amazon, I went over to the brand side and I've worked with several organizations. And really what I think is relevant for this podcast is looking at how you take more of a legacy organization that has like such history and has done, all the people there have done so much work building this foundation. But how do you adjust that? Myself as like a chiropractor, like how do you adjust that for e-commerce? And how do you make sure you're taking the right steps and you're building a new foundation to go out and do all this cool digital AI, e-commerce, shiny stuff? When I was at Signify, formerly Philips Lighting, I helped them, this $8 billion lighting organization, 100 and something years old. I helped them build their entire e-commerce organization for consumer. And so that was an amazing experience. And that, again, I feel like it's compounds on the theme of my background where I really get the exposure to marketing, sales, and operations. Because with e-commerce, you can't have one without the other. And it's really important, even if you are VP of marketing, you have to understand how forecasting works. And you have to understand what kind of packaging you're dealing with. And you have to understand what the customer wants if you're selling into Amazon or selling into somebody else. That's been the theme of my experience. I'm not the e-commerce chiropractor. I also call myself the e-commerce Swiss Army knife. Point me at it and I'll figure out how to fix it. And so that's been the last 6 months or so that I've launched my own consulting business, has been working with brands who, okay, we just want to fix it. What do we do? And figuring out, okay, here's a strategy and here's a clear kind of operational approach and process from someone who's actually done that side of it, done the painful stuff. So that's my e-commerce journey. A little bit random, and I definitely don't speak as much Mandarin now as I used to.
As a husband of an Asian wife who was born and raised in New Zealand but speaks Cantonese, she was raised speaking Cantonese in her family household, I definitely appreciate and as someone who has many Asian friends and business associates and colleagues in the industry and has done for a very long time, I can certainly appreciate your Chinese experience, and certainly the cutting edge nature of digital commerce in China is really leading the way for much of the rest of the world. And what a great place to cut your teeth. What a great place to learn some business skills and get some business experience under your belt. China is a wildly dynamic market, and it's pretty full on, pretty intense. And the WeChatification of China has been just phenomenal to watch in terms of e-commerce and digital commerce full stop, and digitalization of the transaction has been phenomenal to watch. And no one outside of China, including the US, has seemed to be able to figure out live stream commerce. China is so far ahead of the rest of the world in so many commerce disciplines and so many commerce channels that I think that's set the stage pretty damn well for you to come back to the US and do what you do.
Absolutely. And I think writing my thesis, it was all about these kind of domestic Chinese brands and how they weren't even really brands, right? The US came in, they used them for OEM manufacturers, or if they was like a little brand, it would get purchased and squashed, right? And so my position and thesis was like, hey, China needs to go, and these brands need to go and make their own thing. Like, they need to become their own brands. They can go do this. And so it's been interesting to see that evolve. And I think one reason China's been able to do that is there is state-owned enterprises, but like a lot of the progression are these like small Chinese businesses that are just like scrapping, right? They're just figuring things out as they go. And they're very close to the customer journey. And I think that's where large organizations get away, is that they get so entrenched in kind of their own kind of siloed in the processes, right? And all their internal teams, and they keep building, which is what they should be doing. But then they're so disconnected from their customer.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. And with regards to the digital customer journey, that's changing so much and so rapidly that your customer and how they shopped even a few years ago is so different than how they do it now. And so I think the closer you can get to that, the more successful you can be as you're trying to go through this different e-commerce digital transformation, if you want to call it that.
And now that you're doing your own thing, your independent thing, and I'm 4+ years into doing my own independent thing after working agency side and brand side for many years and working on lots of cool projects and B2B, B2C, D2C, what is the split of your customers today, retail versus B2B? Because I feel like I specifically chose to niche down in B2B e-commerce consulting because there weren't that many of us out there who understood it, specialized in it, could consult in it, could do full stack consulting across ERP, CRM, CDP, PIM, commerce, omnichannel system integration, punch out, EDI, all that stuff. And I feel like if I was to compare where I think B2B e-commerce today is in terms of adoption and maturity versus B2C, D2C, we're like 5 to 10 years behind still to this day. But that's changing very fast as the buying demographic in the B2B world is changing. Forrester showed in a report as of late last year that 71% of B2B buyers in the US today are millennials and Gen Z. So they're digital natives. And so because the buying demographics has changed, the selling demographic has to change. And the ways and methods and channels that they sell to that new buying demographic has to change. And instead of it being the old boys club in B2B, Now there's many more women in buying positions. There's many more people of all colors, shapes, backgrounds, history. They're coming into this space and they're really shaking the space up. So what would be the split today of retail merchant clients versus, say, B2B merchant clients, or D2Cs that maybe want to establish strategic wholesale channels, or vice versa? What kind of clients are you seeing as your ICP based on your experience?
It's a really good question because it's also been evolving. I will say when I first started out, it was very much like B2C. And I worked with a brand, for example, that was very strong on their D2C site and very strong on their TikTok. They were getting millions of views, right? But their Amazon was a hot mess, right? So coming in and like putting in the standards and building it out, helping them grow a team too, bringing on full time. So providing that leadership as well and just really getting like the basics right. But then recently, I've had an interesting experience where because I've not only been a buyer of technology, so being at a big organization and like going through a RFP process for an advertising optimization software, but I've also used it. I've been pulled over a little bit more to the B2B side, and that started most recently with partnering with Xnorta, which is talk about a leading AI agency. SparkX Global is really just pushing them so far down the road. They're so far ahead in a lot of ways. It was coming from the perspective of, okay, I can give a different insight into the customer journey because I've done it, right? And then also just constantly learning and getting my ear to the ground about understanding what the new tools are. It's LinkedIn now, right? And not only is it LinkedIn, but you can't post as a company, you have to post as a founder. And you have to make those posts interesting and engaging. And they can't just be like, blah. Overlaying that with, and then also thinking about how generative engine optimization works. Like I did a post about how we got Xnorta to be listed as like the top AI advertising tool, right, on ChatGPT. And that was a combined effect of understanding traditional marketing and branding to say, hey, we need to get PR, we need to understand our message, but then knowing how to game the system with these GEOs in a lot of ways that's not happening right now. So that's pulling me over. And what I'm finding is that there's definitely appetite for two ways. One is that these B2B companies who are like, hey, we need help. We need to get into digital. We know all these things need to happen, but we need someone to guide us in their way. Or it's B2C companies who are saying, hey, this whole B2B thing, how do we do that? How do we sell in larger quantities? How do we get out of these onesie twosies and start doing bigger transactions through Amazon Business or otherwise? So I think it's blending between B2B and B2C, and it's interesting to see how it's evolving. But like, I wouldn't call myself a PIM expert or catalog expert. I would go to Jason Hyde for that. But I think as someone who understands the basic core infrastructure of e-commerce, being that partner next to the businesses to say, okay, I'm their guide, essentially. I think about like high tide commerce, branding. I think of myself as like an e-commerce compass in a lot of ways. So it's okay. You don't need to be digging into AI right now. You don't need to be launching that because you don't have a PIM system. And it's all held up. I was laughing at Jason like yesterday. It's all held up by some like Morty guy in the basement with Excel files that's holding up literally this entire organization's catalog data. Right. So I think it's being that guide to organizations who want to transform for the digital age and want to optimize their e-commerce, but maybe aren't 100% sure how to do it because there's lots of shiny objects out there. Oh, and we need to be thinking about efficiency in 2025. Oh, and tariffs. Oh, and more costs. So there's a lot to deal with right now. And it's incredible how fast things are moving and changing and evolving. And so I think having someone by your side that can help guide you and say, okay, here's how you prioritize because you can't do it all.
Yeah. Or you can't do it all right now.
Can't do it all right now, but here's the roadmap for that. And oh, by the way, we're going to keep this a little bit flexible because by the time we get to this step, it's probably all going to be changed. So that's where I see, and I know it's not technically like an ICP, but it's a bit of a broader ICP, but brands that want to do better in their e-commerce. They want to understand better how to sell on e-commerce, and they want to understand how to reach their customers, and they want a guide in that process.
And in that sense, it feels like almost like a fractional e-com manager or head of digital or CDO type of fractional type of a role, and being able to be that compass and that guide. Sometimes businesses know that they need to transform. They know that their customers are becoming digital first, digital natives. They know that the channel proliferation is extreme, and they need to be expert in all those channels. They need to be truly or become truly channel agnostic, but they don't know what that means in practice, and they don't know what that means operationally. They don't know whether they should have an internal warehouse, a 3PL, or a combination of the two. They don't know where and how they should have click and collect, ship from store, ship from DC. They don't know how to do order management. They don't know how to do warehouse management. They don't know any of those things because they've never had to think about those things, but now they
Mhm.
do. And so I think, what to insource, what to outsource, what to develop capability in, what not to focus on, which channels to focus on, and which channels maybe to hire specifically around. And to your point, even vaunted Amazon has got religion around B2B. And recently I saw a Reuters report, I think it was actually at the end of 2023. They put out a report that in Europe in particular, they're pretty strong in B2B in the US, but in Europe, they don't have the supply to meet all of the B2B demand, the wholesale demand. And so they're actually going out there and courting new B2B suppliers specifically and targeting them to fill in category gaps in B2B in Europe because they know that B2B shipping cartons, pallets, and containers, that transaction value is much higher than shipping a single satchel to an individual B2C or D2C customer. And it requires a wholesale change of mindset, thinking, and operations. And even the logistics partners that you partner with the brand
Mhm.
changes when you go from shipping door to door one single item or two single items to now starting to think about, okay, do I need field sales? Okay, cool. Do I need account management? Okay, cool. Do I need credit accounts? Okay, cool. What are my credit terms going to be? Okay, how do I vet my B2B customers and how much credit do I give them? And how do I implement credit control? How do I service them at a high level because it's a long-term relationship building exercise? How do I get prepared to ship cartons and pallets and containers when I'm used to doing onesie, twosie packing at my packing stations? This whole thing for these businesses that see, and one of the things I try to teach through my content is that D2C, for example, it is a channel. It is not a fucking business model. And the D2C brands that treated it as a business model are really hurting today. Nike has wound back their D2C play and they're
Yep.
now getting back into wholesale. We see Allbirds has nearly gone out of business because they staunchly resisted wholesale in favor of D2C. We see all the D2C darlings that exploded during COVID, and they're all hurting because they didn't establish any other routes to market other than D2C. And as D2C CAC costs explode, all of a sudden now they have no other way to de-risk their business than to try to start to get into channels that they wouldn't normally be able to be in through strategic wholesale partnerships. And so I think the whole world of commerce is changing. And I think having someone like you by their side to hold their hand and say, okay, let's look at all the pantheon of opportunity that we have out there. And what's probably more important is deciding what we say no to than what we say yes to. And are you experiencing that a lot with your clients?
Yes. I have ones that, like I mentioned, come to me and say, okay, we want to do this AI thing. I'm like, your catalog data is on Excel and we need to fix that first. But I also think too, I have another client who I'm talking to right now, early stages, is saying, hey, we want to fix our content on Amazon and we want to do this and that. I say, that's great, but 45% of your sales are going to non-authorized sellers. So what that means is that you're only getting half of your sales on Amazon is going towards you. Who are the other ones? They're A lot of them are resellers, partners that you have already, but you don't have authorized reseller agreements. And I think that's going to be a really big challenge. You don't want to go scorched earth. You have these long-term partnerships. But as part of moving forward into the digital age is saying, hey, how do we go out and maintain figure out the relationships we keep? And the ones we keep, we make sure that we're getting them with authorized reseller contracts. A lot of times, like even at a big company, Signify, most of the B2B contracts didn't have anything about where they could sell. And you have to go in and really dig in and understand what's going on with our current channels, what's performing, what's not, who's reselling to whom, and clean that up because it's like fake sales almost, right? So I think it's the openness. What will separate the kind of sheep from the goats, right? The ones that survive and the ones that don't are the ones who are open to thinking different and who are open to, maybe again, it's not just like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's being open to the fact that it's going to look different. And I think a lot of these organizations too, they think we don't want to get rid of a bunch of people. That you don't have to. You have a lot of upskilling opportunities within organizations. And the great thing is you have these younger generations that are coming in and say, I can do your TikTok. I'm on TikTok all the time. You wouldn't think of some of these big companies on something like TikTok, but that is where you go and find these niche groups and audiences that are actually going to be really excited about a light pole and all the capabilities and specs behind that. That's where they are. So it's definitely, hopefully, a bit of a short-term growing pain. But unfortunately, what I've seen is over the last 10 years of being in e-commerce, a lot of things are either changing too slowly or refusals change. And just that's not how we do things. That's not how our customer does things. Your customer now, maybe, who's going to retire in 3 years, but what about the ones that are coming up? How do we go and figure out what they need? So yeah, it's definitely common. And I think it's trying not to also get whiplash from all the new shiny things that are coming out. To your point about what to say no to, you can pick 3 things to do this year. What are they going to be? Let's figure that out.
You've got the bandwidth for 2 or 3 really strong go-to-market initiatives here, but you can't do 20. So let's see where we think we're going to get what we think is going to be the biggest lever that we can pull this year to help grow our business, to help establish our positioning in the market, to help us grab market share, all those other things that we want to do. First of all, I guess strategically at board level, we need to define our priorities of what we're actually trying to, if we could wave a magic wand and at the end of this year, we were not where we are today, what would that look like? If we could wave a magic wand, where would you want this business to be? What channels would you want it to be good at? What kind of new customers would you want to have on our customer roster? What kind of capabilities, what kind of catalog and category expansion would you like to see? Is that the priority? Is it onboarding more brands into our business? Is it manufacturing and designing more products to be distributed under our brand? And I find that vision is sometimes lacking literally at the CXO level of the business. And so no wonder the rest of the business has no idea what to focus on. If the board doesn't know what to focus on, then it can't tell the team what to focus on, which means everybody's running around in a siloed way, like chickens with their heads cut off, and none of it is very efficient. And if there's one thing I've learned in e-com, and I'd love your take on this, is that everything in e-com is cross-functional. Everything. Like you cannot do any one thing in e-commerce in a silo. It's impossible. In fact, I often use the term that e-commerce in a business is a service provider to the rest of the company. It is literally a service provider to the rest of the business. So when I was working in e-com as an e-com manager inside a brand, it was like I was working with marketing, I was working with ops, I was working with logistics, I was working with the CFO. I was literally working with every single operational department in the business because e-commerce has to service those parts of the business. And even my KPIs that I in theory owned, I can't completely own them because so much of that role is completely out of my control. And I'll give you one example. I'd love you to give me a few more examples from your experience. So when we looked at our data, what we found is that when items were out of stock, based on the percentage of our total catalog that was out of stock at any given point in time on a rolling basis, that had an inverse correlation to our conversion rate. Now, interestingly, that wasn't just conversion rate on those items, it was conversion rate on all the rest of our catalog too, because what we found was, I think we had on average about 2.5 items per basket, right? So what we found was because our customers were adding 2.5 items to their basket on average, so even our top sellers, if we were out of stock of one of those items, they would abandon the entire basket. And the reason for that was because they could no longer qualify for things like free shipping thresholds, loyalty points, all these other things that they got by having 2.5 items or roughly $150 or whatever it was in their cart. They lose all that benefit when one of the key items they want to buy was out of stock. So they would abandon the entire cart and either come back at a later date when they could buy the whole cart, or they would just simply transfer that cart to another supplier that could buy everything through one purchase. And it was for convenience. We talked to our customers, and one of the things was, hey, if you're out of stock of one item, then I now have to split my shipments. I got to be home at 2 different times to receive these 2 different orders from 2 different suppliers. It doesn't work for me. So I'm going to go to some place where I can get my entire cart from one place. And I'm trying to say you have to really deeply and intimately understand your buyer's psychology before you can serve them and actually put your focus on the things that matter to them.
Absolutely. And I think there's so many things to say to that, but I think if I'm going to get like focused on a couple different, like one thing first, and then I'll talk about my kind of examples. But there's a book called Outcomes versus Outputs. And I don't have the author in my head right now, but we could put it in the show notes. But when an organization focuses on the output, hey, we want to increase sales by 25% this year. To your point, the rest of the organization's like, okay, we'll go do that. And no idea how to do it, right? And they go down the wrong path versus going to an outcome to say, we want to grow our D2C channel. Then you can go, once you determine what the output is, you can go and work on changing, identifying the customer behavior, identifying what value they can get, right? So if you say, hey, I want another client I was talking to that we're going to be working with is saying, we want to make our D2C like the number one destination for our industry. I said, okay, why? Why would your customer buy on your D2C site? What value are you giving to them? Oh, right. But this was all the way up to the board of this is our number one goal. Okay, it's possible. Let's go figure out what behaviors we have to change through incentivizing, right? Pulling over the customers to make that happen. Another thing, when I think about, to your point about the whole just not understanding how everything is connected, one of the organizations I was with, Zenus, when I was managing director of their Amazon business, they were mattresses, bed and bugs. It was a similar thing where you'd have something called a variation, where you'd have one product page that had all the other products on it. And we knew that if that anchor SKU, the SKU that everything was built off of, or called parent SKU sometimes, if that went out of stock, 30 products went out of stock.
Bloody
right?
hell. But of course, because it looked like the whole PDP was out of stock.
Exactly. So the page just would go away, right? So we determined, okay, here are anchor SKUs, like 30 SKUs that we partnered with Amazon, because they're 1P, to say, no matter what, these can never go out of stock. Because it's not just the one twin mattress that would impact the business. It was sometimes exponentially larger impact in terms of sales. But without understanding that, without understanding how the connection works on the site and how it works, we wouldn't have gotten there. But the other thing I was thinking about when you were talking about how silos and organization and all that, a lot of these organizations are split out like, hey, here's our product marketing team. Here's our marketing team. Here's this, here's that, here's innovation.
Here's retention. Here's acquisition. Here's all these different silos, right?
Nobody talks, they talk to each other, but they're not set up in a way where they can work really closely and collaborative together. When I think about outcomes versus outputs, if I think of, okay, I want to grow my e-commerce business, then that means you need an e-commerce team that has a product marketer who's actually developing products for e-commerce, working with whatever innovation team, have an innovation person on there. You have a marketing person on there. And that is the core pod that ensures that you have successful experience. Because when I was at Signify, we had issues where there'd be products brought to market that we'd see it and be like, we can't sell this. The packaging's wrong. We're going to end up owing more in fines than we are going to make. It's going to break as soon as we ship it. Because these were light bulbs or light products, right? And so you'd have all this hard work that had been put in by the team and investment just to say, hey, you can't sell it in your largest volume channel. So I think like the earlier, to your point, you can have either the principles of what's required. So what we did was we laid out and really did a lot of training with the teams. The organization was not going to break up the silos and this and that, but we had almost like a e-commerce Bible, e-commerce playbook that said, okay, anything that happens, anything that we do, we have to think digital first. We have to think, how is this going to ship? We have to think how it's going to show up. You're going to do content, that's great, digital first. And so just by doing that, we ended up moving away from a lot of hiccups and the stalls and saving a lot of time and resources to develop products and bring them to market.
Yeah, I guess if you're not digital first, then you're trying to retrofit digital capability onto your traditional capabilities. And if you've only historically ever sold through retail, for example, and your retail partners, for example, and you've only ever had to service retail channels with point of sale material and shelf frontages and things like that. But then all of a sudden now you're like, there's this massive opportunity on Amazon. What does that look like for us? Maybe we even have to create different SKUs for our Amazon channel. That maybe the underlying product is exactly the same, but maybe the way we sell it, maybe the unit count, the way that we package it, the way that we bundle it, the way that we kit it, that maybe that has to be completely different for this channel. So maybe we have a virtual SKU in our ERP that represents the Amazon specific version of that SKU, and then it has a bomb in the back end that explodes out and says, okay, when we sell it to Amazon, then here's all the components that have to go with that for the Amazon channel. And I'm seeing an evolution too, not just in B2B, but also in B2C land, where retailers, even if they're an aggregated retailer, D2C, doesn't really matter, they're starting to fully grasp the idea that we want to sell solutions, not SKUs. And so one of the ways we can differentiate in that environment is to say, look, okay, I'm going to put together an entire kit for you as a solution. For example, a few years ago, I was working with a four-wheel drive parts that they sold four-wheel drive parts. They designed and manufactured four-wheel drive parts. They were a reseller of four-wheel drive parts. They sold retail, D2C, and wholesale to other stores that sold four-wheel drive parts. Plus, they were a four-wheel drive dismantler and selling used four-wheel drive parts. So they had a very complex business, and they were totally omni-channel, right? Some of it was being sold direct, some of it was being sold to retail partners, etc. And one of the things that they did to differentiate was to say, okay, instead of selling just this pair of shocks, for example, for this Jeep Wrangler or whatever it is, okay, we're going to sell an entire suspension kit, right? An entire lift kit, and it has the shocks, and it's got the bump stops, and it's got the trailing links, and it's got the springs, it's this whole kit, right? And it's like you put in your year, you put in your make, you put in your model, you put in your year, and we're going to automatically filter for all of these different packages that we've put together for you so that you don't have to navigate our website and say, I need those shocks, and I need those sway bars, and I need that light kit. No, cool. We've done all that hard work for you. And we've said, here's a kit for you. If you want to do off-roading, here's the kit. And it includes the wheels and the tires and the whole 9 yards. And that was their unique expertise in their industry, able to build these bundles that took the entire thought process and the bandwidth of the customer. It took it out away from them. It abstracted that out so that they could just go, this is what I want to achieve. You tell me what I need to buy to achieve that thing, that outcome. And I feel like more vendors are starting to get religion around this idea. We want to be a solution provider, not just a SKU seller, because if we're just a SKU seller, then everyone else can sell the same SKUs and they can compare us directly on price and everything else. There's no differentiation in that world, right?
Well, absolutely. And it brings to mind so many things. But I think the biggest thing you said is like not only how you differentiate, but also how do you define yourself as a brand within your space? And in the days now that there's a bunch of resellers and copycats coming to every single channel, how do you both incentivize your resellers, like your distributors, to market your brand, but also how do you incentivize people to want your brand? And it's not just understanding what they need. Like obviously that company understood what their customers needed. It's, to your point, making it easy, right? The whole foundation of Amazon is the flywheel: selection, price, convenience. Selection, right? They offered the right selection in the right combinations at the right price and made it really easy for customers to both find it and buy it. So when I'm reading about and thinking about like the era of AI, this new era of e-commerce, everything's everywhere all at once, right? You can go and whether you Google it or Amazon it or TikTok, there's just so many
ChatGPT it.
There's so many options and there's just so much that people are like, okay, help me curate this. And so how do you build a brand that has that specialization and become almost this curated offer for your target customers? And, when you think about it, like I think I saw it was something like in the new era of e-commerce, brands are even more valuable because there's so many non-brands. And how do you get people to start coming back? So when you talked about D2C, like what's the role of that, seeing it as a channel? Long term, you're not going to do volume, most likely through your D2C channels, unless you just have a very unique circumstance. But can that be your CRM hub? That's how you engage with customers. That's how you bring them back. That's how you give them different incentives. But don't try to battle for Amazon for volume. It's just not going to happen. But maybe you find synergies like the Buy with Prime program, right? Like how do you offer 2-day free shipping through your D2C site? And I think that there's still I'm sure there's a lot of ego, right? But very much we're our own brand and we're our D2C. Amazon's not trying to take your brand. They're also not trying to build your brand. You have to do it for them. But to your point about like, how do you leverage their unique capabilities and take advantage of it versus fight against it? And it's also not just Amazon. If you look at other retailers like Best Buy, they're starting to take away branding from the shelves. It's no longer, hey, we get one brand of this. They want to offer everything possible. And so if you're not pushing your own brand, your distributors aren't going to do it. And now retailers aren't going to do it. So I think it's like looking at the democratization of sales and retail. And when every person can go and start something, the focus is like, how am I approaching my customer? How am I thinking digital first? And how am I building a brand around this based on what those customers need and value?
And I feel almost like the traditional concept of a customer funnel is broken. Like customers don't come down a funnel. Like they sometimes don't even know themselves where product discovery is happening or recognize it as that. They sometimes themselves don't understand when they move from discovery to consideration to actually purchasing, post-purchase, loyalty. Like customers don't think in terms of channels. They don't think in terms of funnels. They are going, for me, and I think I'm an outlier in that I do most of my shopping online, and I realize not everybody does, but I do most of my shopping online, and I'm weird that way because I don't really like most retail experiences, and I would just prefer the convenience of shopping online. But like, for example, now that I've moved to Mexico, my buying behavior has changed mainly because I am now buying almost everything through Amazon because of the trust that I have in Amazon being able to get me my shit to my door in Mexico, where logistics in this country is all over the map, and addressing and it's complex. Fulfillment in Mexico is a super complex thing, but I can trust Amazon. I will occasionally buy off of other brands online that I've heard through the grapevine. Oh, you can trust them. They will get this thing to you. But when we first moved here, it was almost 100% Amazon buying because I know that Amazon either will get it to me, or if they don't, they will make it right one way or another. And so I feel like my buying behavior is also influenced by the environment I'm buying in, and the country that I'm buying in, and where I'm having it shipped to, and what the size of the item is. And it's not just about price. It's about, hey, am I getting the greatest overall value for my money by buying through this location or buying this product or this brand? And in many instances, I'm not necessarily buying name branded products. I'm buying a solution that, based on the feedback and the reviews, I can discover will work for my need. And so one of the first things I do when I'm filtering on Amazon is I filter by the star rating and I filter by Prime, because I'm paying for Prime anyway. I might as well get the shipping for free on this bloody thing, even if it's international. And two, I want to filter for 4 stars or above, because I don't want to be the guinea pig on buying these products. I want someone else to have been the guinea pig as much as possible. And so I think that the buying motivators really do change by market quite substantially. And that's another thing I think a lot of brands don't think about.
They don't. And there's a lot there to unpack. I think even brands in the US struggle with, I don't know if I want to buy from this D2C site. There's so many scams out there for customers. There's, again, the trust. I bought a dress off of, I think it was like, can't remember the name of it, Beholden, one of those like digital ones. And I didn't realize till I got it that there was no returns. And I'm like, oh God. Like, I didn't even think to check for that. I should have checked for that. And I'm like, now what am I going to do?
I should know better. I'm in this bloody industry.
I know, but they also didn't say no returns clearly, right? So I
Wow.
dropped and I gave a bad review. It was a bad day. But so when you think about it, there's a couple different things there. Number one, again, don't fight against Amazon, fight with them, right? Go the way the puck is going. Amazon already has built decades of customer trust in their platform. The next thing is, if I was going to spend so if I was thinking about Amazon and this and that, understanding the customer's digital journey, to your point, is not a funnel. It's like a crazy, insane mind map, right? So like mapping the customer journey is so important, even if you can just start with a very basic one and figure out where you're having drop-offs, figure out where you're running into challenges. The other area I would really look closely at is your customer service. How are they handling Amazon issues? So for example, one of the clients I had in the fall, they're struggling with their review ratings, to your point. They had competitors who are doing black hat tactics to get reviews, right? They're paying for them, X, Y, and Z. But they also had some legitimate customer concerns and issues with their product. And so I helped train their customer service team, taught them like, hey, this is how we need to respond. You give a refund no matter what, just to start, because it was right before Q4. and changing the way you think as a seller, right? Because on the 1P side, it's a little bit different. Changing the way you think as a seller to think, okay, how am I going to take care of my customers? Amazon has set a bar. Like it or not, that's where it's at, right? And so how do you build and meet that bar to better unlock additional dollars? I feel like a lot of companies don't put a lot of thought into their customer service, right? And specifically how their customer service manages e-commerce and digital context.
And to your point, like if someone has an average of 4 stars or above, I'll literally go in and I will filter the reviews by the 1 stars and the 2 stars, and I will look at those. That's the first thing I do. I don't really care about the 4 star reviews.
Yeah.
I care about the 1s and the 2s, right? And more importantly, I care about if the brand responded to those reviews and actually answered back to those reviews. If someone,
I can't answer back anymore on Amazon.
oh, can you not? Wow.
No, not anymore. They took that out. So that's where social media is even more important.
Wow.
Because you have to have presence everywhere. Because if I see bad reviews, I'm going to go to social and I'm going to look you up. I'm going to look to see like, hey, do you have pissed off comments on your Instagram account? Because
I'm going to chat GPT you and check out the sentiment around your brand.
Yes, yes. And so it can't just be one spot. You have to think about it holistically. And that's where it's like this consumer org, almost like instead of starting from like product marketing, it's almost just like your consumer. And here is the vertical, that's the consumer that does X. And you're building it out based on whatever the goal is. And you're basing it out of maybe project teams to say, okay, here's our goal for 2020, whatever. This group's going to be on this goal. This group's going to be on this goal. And you can structure teams in lots of different ways, but it's got to be closer to the consumer in terms of how people are thinking and how they're building out their action plans and prioritization.
I'd love your thoughts on brands scaling the unscalable, and I'm going to tell you what I mean by that. And I've mentioned this on the podcast before. So I was a regular consumer of an alcohol retail website. They were pure play online retailer, aggregator retailer of alcohol in New Zealand. And for 2 or 3 years, I was a regular customer of theirs, bought almost monthly from them for years. And then I moved to Mexico, right? Now, so apart from their regular email blast, because I was on their mailing list and all that sort of stuff, I never got a unique email to me when I churned, because I obviously churned. I moved to Mexico and stopped buying off them randomly, just one day, stopped buying off them. I would have thought that brand would want to know why the hell I churned. Is it because we did something wrong? Is it because we don't have the right pricing? Is it we don't have the right range? You bought from us for years. Why did you all of a sudden stop buying from us? Is it something we did, or is it something else? And I think that in most instances, and in all the brands I've worked inside of, the customer service team is never 100% busy 100% of the time. And so I think scaling the unscalable, why is it from somebody from their customer service team didn't pick up the damn phone and just give me a call and say, hey, look, we really appreciate you. You've been a loyal customer for years. And we noticed that, but we noticed that for the last 3 months, you haven't bought anything from us. Did we do something wrong? Can we do something to win you back? And then I would have told them, no, I've actually moved to Mexico, so you're not local to me anymore, and you don't ship to Mexico. This is where we're at. And then they could have at least understood why I churned. But I think that most brands get into the mindset and the mode and operationally into the one-to-many communication model, and it's all push communications. It's all from us to you. It is not a dialogue form of communication. There is no way to create a loop of dialogue there. They don't have that model in mind. They want to be able to send mass emails in bulk. They want to be able to send mass SMSs in bulk. They want to be able to ship in bulk, right? They want to be able to do everything in bulk. And I think that brands overlook some massive opportunities to create brand loyalty. What if every single time somebody bought off you for the very first time, a week after the purchase, a customer service actually just rings them up and says, hey, we noticed you just bought off for the very first time. Thank you. We appreciate your business. What did you think? What do you think of the product? How was the buying experience? What was it like to use our website? What was it like to go into our retail store? Whatever it is. I just think that brands have worked so hard to squeeze every ounce of efficiency out of their business operations that they forget the biggest levers are the relationship building levers.
That's such a good point. And I think for my first thought when you were talking about like why customer service didn't call, it goes back to silos too. The customer service team didn't call because the marketing team is the one who gets all those that HubSpot data or Klaviyo data or
Yes.
whatever they're using, right? And there's no connection. And then there's also no authority on that customer because they would have had to go through 10 rounds of approvals to get any kind of like a discount code or anything. So it's where getting into that, like having a customer team that is just focused, right? Because customer service is assuming that you're waiting for someone to call and complain. That's why a lot of the reviews you get online are going to be the pissed off people. You're not going to actually hear from the happy people or the happy people that are like, oh, this is just a circumstance that changed. So I think if you would think about having like a customer team where their sole goal is to take care of their customers, Amazon has something similar to this internally, where your point about scale, there's ways to build out scale if you have a team that's focused on it. So for example, you can build in different pieces of the data structure to say, okay, we need to have a list of the customers who just bought. Maybe you pick the ones that bought over a certain price, right?
Exactly. A certain value.
Yeah. And then you also, I think a lot of companies aren't assigning lifetime value to their customers. So you have this potential cohort where we know these people are worth like $300 a year or whatever it is. They have the highest lifetime value. We deal with them with kid gloves because we know one of them is worth 10 of these other guys. You can start at least by putting in a structure to say, okay, here are the ones we know we're going to make sure we keep. We call them, we send them stuff, whatever. We keep those ones. And then think about how you build out, okay, how do we balance scale with
operational capacity and all that
yes,
stuff.
all these things, right? But at least the least thing you could do is at least look at the ones that are worth a lot and figure out how, because I think to your point, it's like we've gotten into scale. Companies are like, hey, we got to scale. We got to scale. We hear this. And they've gotten away from that personal relationship. That was the reason that Joe Smo of Poles R Us used to buy from this one pole manufacturer because he really liked him, right? Like they had that relationship. I think that's where it's like B2B gets a little bit clinked up because they're like, we have to scale, but we're built on these relationships. How do we make those things work together? And I think there is a world where it works together. And ironically, B2C often does better with that relationship building, right? You reach out to someone on social and they're going to ping you back right away. So I think that's where the blend needs to be because it's like, it's still just a consumer. It's still a person.
Yeah.
How do you do that while not completely draining your team of resources?
Yeah, a company might be paying for it, but it was the person that decided to make the purchase in the first place.
Yeah. And I think it's also like understanding the team of people behind it, right? How do I make this team's life better? What is the process for this person who goes and buys his pole? Who does he have to go and yell at or ask or request? How do I make that better, easier for him? Or you think about like an agency or a tool or a software. How do I make it easier on the person? Who is my champion within the organization? Make it easier for them to go and make this case and then work from there.
So true. So true. What is next for you? What is on your radar in terms of either expanding your services or further refining your ICP? I know you're really new to this independent consultancy thing, so it's really early days and you may not even have an answer to this yet, but what, if you were to look out 12, 18 months from now, where would you like your practice to be ideally? And what kind of new customers would you like to have as part of your practice?
Yeah, I can say one thing that's I'm not interested in is I'm not going to be an agency with a ton of clients. Like I am very much a boutique agency. If I have other things that I need to bring on board, I have trusted people who I've worked with, who I would work with again, right? Who I bring on board to help fill any gaps. So I think for me, it's about developing relationships with the businesses I work with. I just finished up with a contract and they sent me like this great kudo board and like a gift card and stuff. Like I want my contracts to end like that, where the people are just so stoked. I've almost worked myself out of a job, but then that gives me future. I'm not looking to bleed people ongoing. So 12 to 18 months, I'd say probably a 60-40 split between B2B and B2C, just given the nature of some of these bigger projects. I'm not going in and trying to like growth hack by pricing strategies and stuff for sellers online, but I'm going in and figuring out, hey, how do I bring these businesses along? How do we partner together to protect your people, protect your business, and protect your brand? And make sure you're making the right investment choices. I think the other piece that I'm really leaning into is AI. So not necessarily saying, hey, I'm going to go write a strategy via AI, because most of the time it's garbage. But how do I use that to help me work smarter? And how do I use that to get rid of some of the clunk, right? That often comes with work like this. And how do I make myself more efficient? As well as I just love reading and I love learning about new things. So always keeping pace and keeping my finger on the pulse of what's happening, what's good, what's not good, and continuing to make those connections within the industry. And so I add even more great people like yourself and Jason Hine to my sphere of people, right?
Your network is your net worth. And I well and truly learned that when I went consulting. It's man, okay, no man or woman is an island, and man, it takes a village in many cases to deliver for clients and to get them where they need to be. Sure, maybe we're the strategic lead in many respects, but we can't do everything on our own. We can't be all things to all people on our own. It's impossible. And so I figure, why even try? And so I totally agree with you. Now, if people want to get a hold of you, I'll drop your LinkedIn link in the show notes. I'll drop your website link in the show notes. But other than that, if people want to reach out to you, they want to have a chat to you about all things e-com, digital retail, Amazon, channel conflict, people development, org design, all the cool stuff that you work in, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Probably LinkedIn. I'm a true product of what I'm seeing, and I will say my website does not get nearly as much love as my LinkedIn. But yeah, drop me a note. I have a link to my Calendly on my LinkedIn page. 30 minutes to chat. It's no problem. If you want more time, we can talk about pricing. But I'm definitely here from the perspective of if you're not ready to bring in someone to help you reorg or restructure your organization or figure out what you need to do next, I'm also available for advising, coaching, right? So even if you just want to get a little stronger on e-com and impress all your bosses, just reach out. So yeah, LinkedIn's the best place to reach me.
I love
And
it.
follow me, please, so
Of
you can
course.
see some of the that I'm coming out with.
Yeah, you are putting out great content, so I will second that. Definitely go follow Kara on LinkedIn, and I will put that link in the show notes. But now, as we come down to the end of our time together, I get to flip the script. I get to hand the microphone over to you. I get to let you ask me one question, any question you like. It could be personal or professional. So, Kara Babb from High Tide Commerce, what is your question for me today?
Oh, that's a tough one. I was about to go with what's your choice of taco, but I'm not going to.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you, what is the most exciting thing, whether it's tool or technology, that's happening within your space? What are you super stoked about right now?
Right now, I think 2025, because I focus so heavily on B2B, 2025 is going, and I made a post about this recently, is going to be the year where more B2Bs meet their customers where they are instead of forcing them into channels that make sense for the seller, for the
Yeah.
supplier. And what I mean by that is there are now, with generative AI and with large language models, there are multiple e-commerce platforms that now will be able to take emails, for example, email quote requests, email orders with PO attachments or CSV attachments, map those directly into the commerce system as if they were placed through the e-commerce front end with zero or very low manual intervention at all. Also extending those same services, whether it be sales services, quoting services, pricing questions, product search, etc., into channels like WhatsApp, Slack, and Teams, which is where a lot of B2B relationships take place and where a lot of the communication around B2B takes place. So not only are a lot of B2B focused e-commerce platforms offering that now as part and parcel of their platform, but there are some standalone technologies out there. If you've got a platform that doesn't do that today, there's some standalone AI technologies out there that will do that today that you can plug in to your existing stack that basically bring sales force and service automation to your commerce stack. And that frees up your very valuable salespeople to do what they do best, which is to go out and hunt new relationships, build existing relationships, go out and schmooze and take people to lunches and ball games and all the things that happen in the B2B world and tell them about new product releases and say, look, can we source these products from you that you don't currently get from us today? And have those discussions by automating a lot of the manual heavy lift that sales teams and customer service teams do today. That is coming. And there's a platform that I've just recently had on the podcast called Motivate, for example, that is doing exactly this. And they're a standalone platform to do this automation using AI and mapping directly into the commerce system. And it's really exciting because historically we've focused on, in the B2B world, How can we create an adoption plan to get and migrate a lot of our customers into our digital channels, whether that's self-service e-commerce, punch out, EDI, whatever it is, because that's good for us as a business and it brings efficiency to us as a business. But meeting your customers where they are means that you get orders of magnitude higher ROI on your commerce technology investments, because all of a sudden customers can still do business with you the way that they've always done it, but you bring an automation layer into that to where your commerce investments pay massive ROI dividends. So it's really exciting to see that evolution happening in the world of B2B. And that's one of the things I'm most excited about for 2025.
That's awesome. I'm going to check that tool out.
Listen, I've loved this conversation. I really appreciate your time. Can't wait to speak to you again soon. If you'd like to get mentored by Jason for free, head over to greenwoodconsulting.net, scroll to the bottom of the page, and click Get Mentored by Jason.